Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next interview is with Stephen Forbes, whose film Hold Your Fire is premiering at the Toronto International Film Festival. And once again, I can't say enough good about this film. It's a story that you're going to need to learn a little bit more about. It's certainly something that I didn't know much about, that's for sure. And I think it all goes back to a time in history in Brooklyn, 1973, where some serious lessons were learned by not only the police department at the time, but by I think the world. I mean, I think there was a universal story coming out of this, a universal narrative that, as you're going to find out, not only in our conversation or my conversation with Stefan, that transcends street justice, but also that being a narrative in the film itself. This is a film about challenging conversations. It's a film about empathy and the lack thereof for what we would normally call, the bad guys. This is a film about race and racism. It's a film about violence and about toxic masculinity. It's also a film about change and about how you can move not only the conversation forward, but you can actually move the needle on the way we operate in this world. And so you're going to meet this man, this what I would call very quirky, idiosyncratic academic police officer who turns sort of the world upside down when it comes to this idea of conversation and dialogue, and says, hang on a minute here, maybe we should put the guns down and have a conversation. And you'll hear him say in the film that there's every problem can be solved through a conversation. Stefan has got a lot of passion, and this is one of those films and one of those interviews where we could have gone on for quite a long time. We talk about fear and about safety and about conflict resolution. We even talk about crossing borders, and not sure how we got there, but it's still kind of interesting because really we're talking about crossing the bridge, right? We're building those bridges, we're crossing them and meeting people hopefully on those bridges at the same time. This is about social change in a very conscious way. It's about bridging that gap, and it's about learning how to listen. And it's about learning how to talk to people on the ground. So it was wonderful to have Stefan on the show. And once again, like I said, one of those conversations that could have gone on for quite a while. The film's called Hold Your Fire. It's premiering at the Toronto International Film Festival. You're going to want to keep your eye out for it. And it is going to be going global, as they say. So stay tuned. And don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my speaking and about my writing. You can get a copy of Real Change is Incremental there, and also find out more about my podcasting. Face2facelive.ca will get you there as well. Everything's under one umbrella now, and you can listen to one of close to 600 interviews. We got quite a library there for you to choose from, and we've got a whole quite a few more already sitting in our digital library waiting to go live, and I'm probably going to be doing about 10 more at this year's festival as well, and I'm pretty excited about that. So if you like what we're doing here, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, sign up for our newsletter. We would love that. Please socially mediate us as much as you possibly can. Get word on the street. Send it to your friends and family. Subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts as well. That's super important. And if you can, take a few extra, no joke, seconds, leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify. We would so appreciate it. But for now, stay tuned. Listen in. Stefan Forbes and his brilliant and compelling and important new film, Hold Your Fire. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by a very special guest here with us today. We have Stefan Forbes here to talk about his brilliant and insightful and moving new film, Hold Your Fire. Stefan, thank you for joining me today and kind of kicking off the Toronto International Film Festival for me. So thanks for that.
Well, I'll do my best, man.
Yeah. So you're just in town. Any issues getting into the city?
Well, we got kicked off our flight because we didn't realize we needed a COVID test. And we spent days trying to get one of our main characters, Shuaib Rahim, into Canada. And we realized it was going to be utterly impossible. So that, these borders are always an interesting question, and especially in a time of global migration. But for our film, obviously, these four young men who've had the label of cop killers following them all their lives, it's sad that none of them could be here, and it just makes you realize even more how we put all these barriers between ourselves and those who we perceive as enemies in society. They're stripped of a lot of their humanity, and there's so many things making this film that have really caused me to cross borders, to interview these guys, to go up to Attica and Elmira, to cross borders and talk to cops who, people don't usually really seek out their thoughts about their lives and their emotional trauma. So it's just more borders we're trying to cross here as filmmakers, which I think is kind of our job.
I love, Stefan, by the way, congratulations on the film, world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival. Loved it. I don't know if I can say it was entertaining, but it is a brilliant film. Everyone needs to see this for so many reasons. I love the line, and I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the film, the name, Holding Your Fire. And I believe this came from one of the negotiators. Holding your fire is what negotiation is all about. And isn't that really one of the central themes, this idea of listening, of crossing borders, like you just said, global migration, you're taking a lot on in this film, it seems to me.
I don't even know how I got into global migration. It has nothing to do with this film, except really that I'd been looking for a story about conflict resolution for years. Okay. And I actually traveled to Africa. I shot, in the Rift Valley in Kenya, where these tribesmen carry Kalashnikovs on their back. I talked to a lot of conflict resolution people that are working around the world in trouble spots. And conflict is exacerbated by, global warming and war and all these reasons why people have to move and aren't safe where they are. Just like the four guys in our film didn't feel safe. And that spurs a lot of violence. So I've been looking for this story to tell for so long. And when I finally found this one, I knew that I'd hit something. And it was an incredibly difficult story to tell, just because it touches all these deeply human points. Yeah, it's a story about this weekend in Brooklyn, but it's also a story about all of us, frankly. And sure, we have problems with our policing. We desperately need to fix that. But those problems are just a symptom of the deeper problems in America around race and violence and toxic masculinity and this anti-intellectualism we've had from the beginning, where we think violence is a way to solve problems, which we inherited as a lot of our cultural heritage from Ireland and England, so it goes really deep. But this idea that we can all learn to hold our fire is, I believe, as you said, a very dark film. It's an incredibly hopeful note that the film ends up.
I love that a film about this tragic time in the United States history, and because it's just a smaller narrative of a greater greater narrative going on, not just in the U.S. but around the world, is in a way ultimately about so many things, like any great doc, but about patience, Stefan. I love that, that's what you, I think, as a director, are asking me to be patient with my coworkers, the law enforcement people that I meet, my teachers, my parents, my whoever. And it's an extension of that. Can't we all just get along? And not in an idealistic way. I didn't see that at all, but in a realistic and rooted way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And, one of the reasons I love this film is, a lot of filmmakers share that belief that you and I probably have. Can't we all just get along? But it's so hard to talk about this stuff without being corny.
Right.
And so here's a story full of guns and violence and really the inability to connect on any level that is tragic. It's a way to tell the story visually without all the preaching and the Mr. Rogers kind of message. That's why I got so excited when I heard about this story, because we can get into this really deep stuff about, like you said, being patient, not firing at the people around us, not reacting to the world in a defensive way, not always trying to defend ourselves and use the violence of language or rhetoric. This is true for our families. Parenting is huge. And one of the hostage negotiators talks about that in the film. And he's not joking, as any parent will tell you. You have to learn how to hold your fire to preserve your human connection with your kids or your spouse or your significant other. We all need to learn how to do this. And again, not to say that this film isn't about policing, but I'm excited that it has a deeper message that we watch this film, and over the course of 90 minutes, maybe we'll come out thinking like, wow, maybe I can use a few of these techniques in my own life and in my own society to heal some of these horrible rifts and issues that are hurting us today.
Fascinating that I learned so much about how sort of this idea of negotiation kind of took place and started to grow out of this. Harvey is quite a character. The way that, as he comes off in the film is quite a character. It seems to me the clutter on his desk behind him when you're interviewing him, I think gives us some insight into the academic, I suppose, that he is. But doesn't he say at a point earlier on in the film that, every problem can be solved through conversation, or every problem can be solved through dialogue? And doesn't that presuppose an embrace of one kind or another?
Yeah, and it's a very Jewish thing to say too. In the beginning was the word. It's a very literate culture, and here you have this man whose family came from Russia around a little after the turn of the century, fleeing the pogroms. So they had this experience of being surrounded by hostility and violence and people with big guns. And that's exactly the experience that Shuaib and these guys had inside that building that they blundered into. So Harvey had an instinctive empathy and kinship for these guys, even though they're from totally different walks of life. And, I'm glad you brought him up, because it's just a fascinating character that in the world of the NYPD, in this authoritarian police world with a top-down, macho culture of manhood and violence and, using force to uphold the laws and protect private property. I mean, the police are tasked with a very conservative brief. That's their role in society. And when I found out that within this world, these big macho, mostly Irish guys, here's a 99-pound Jewish intellectual who's a radical pacifist and is trying to teach them deep listening and empathy. Like, oh my God, tell me more.
What's wrong with this picture? Yeah. I felt I want to talk about fear in a second, because I think it really obviously is a theme of the film, and fear on all sides, it seems to me. But did you sense, and I did, even in your interviews, I don't know how long your interviews with those police officers took place over, was it hours or a few days? But I almost felt as if in your editing, we see a bit of a progression. We see a bit of a change in their demeanor, in their character. And I love that, Stefan. I love that there's a redemptive element to your editing, if that makes any sense.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm so glad you noticed that, and I'm a believer in letting these arcs show through, perhaps kind of subtly in a film. I mean, you don't want to hammer that stuff over the head. And I actually really wrestled with letting that final soundbite of Al Baker's
Mm,
play in the film, where he says, we've seen him have this moving experience watching Shuaib and talk about his spiritual journey. And we think, oh my God, it's all going to end happily. And Al loves Shuaib. And no, actually, he still believes they should be executed. And that was a shocking moment for me in the room. And I did grapple with, is that what I want to leave people with? Is that, too depressing? But ultimately, my producer Tia and I really decided, hey, this is reality, and let's not go for some fake kumbaya ending. Here's a guy who's profoundly moved by these young men's journey and still believes they should be murdered. So we need to grapple with that as a society. And I truly believe we need to have these messy conversations. So I want to put it all in there if I can. But I saw movement on everyone's side as they learned about the story. And 47 years later, as they learned facts they never knew. And sorry, go on.
no, I was just going to say exactly. I went back and I read a couple New York Times pieces and I tried to do a little bit of research around it. And yeah, I get the sense that you were revealing some things for some of those folks that they hadn't either thought of before or weren't aware of at all.
Yeah, and for such a watershed event in the NYPD, many of them still actually believe these guys were members of the Black Liberation
Right, right.
Army, which is just crazy misinformation. But a lot of the hostages believed stuff that wasn't true too. Uh, they had never really seen the gunmen talk about why they were in there. Our society and our legal system leaves very little wiggle room for people to have empathy for a so-called bad guy, as the cops love to call them. So
Sure.
they never hear the other side of the story. They don't know what was going on. And, as they learn that stuff, I could see people changing in front of me. I could see their stances changing. I could see their wheels turning. And hopefully that's just a microcosm of the effect that the film will have for people out in the world. I mean, we meet these guys as, these horrible, merciless killers. That's how they're introduced to us. And hopefully by the end, we uncover a very different
Well,
truth
I would
about them.
argue, I hope we see a little bit of ourselves, and allow that will then allow us to take some next steps towards, I don't know, again, corny, idealistic, but more inclusive, a stronger kind of embrace and a greater sense of empathy and love for the other. I want to talk about Ben Ward. We've got limited time, but I wanted to ask you, wasn't it one of the police officers who said, um, violence is a weakness and we've got to transcend this idea of street justice? Wasn't one of the cops that said that?
That's Al Baker. That's the most macho,
Yeah,
like,
that's right. That's what I
guy
thought.
in the whole movie. And at the end, he says, "Well, yeah, this guy Harvey does have a point, And it's a different
Right.
kind of manhood. It's a
Yeah,
quiet strength. It's
yeah.
not an explosive type of strength. And so for him to put that out there is really meaningful, because hopefully, this film can help redefine what being a man is, because
It's
especially in
good.
America, we're inundated with these ridiculous notions of, strength being equated to violence, when it's really not. It's really easy to blow your top and lash out. And it's much more difficult to go through this whole process that Harvey and hostage negotiators like Jack Cambria take us through in the movie. It's a radically different vision of what it is to be a man and to have strength. So I'm
I'm
glad you brought
always,
that up.
yeah, Stefan, I'm always fascinated by a guy like Harvey and how did he get to that place? And obviously, I mean, he could probably be the topic for a great film as well, I would imagine, unpacking his story. But why, the shots of the police, the tank or the armored carrier, the buses, the people, the guns, like, talk about what appeared to be a massive overreaction. It seems to me like none of those folks were thinking about listening to these four men, right? And then he steps in and says, no, we got to turn this whole thing upside down. It's amazing to me that the Rosa Parks of the world, she sat in a different place on the bus and changed history on so many levels. Why Harvey and not someone else? It's a big question, but it's a fascinating one to me, and I'm so glad you bring it up in the film.
Thank you. Hey, now we're not scared of the big questions here.
Nice.
And when you look at Rosa Parks, people think she was just some little old lady who happened to sit in that seat. No, she was chosen by a coalition of very wise people who were studying society and who were creating social change in a very conscious way. And similarly, Harvey didn't just stroll into the, police precinct with a dashiki on and a bundle of books under his arm and some love beads. Harvey was a beat cop for years. He was a traffic cop, and he got his PhD in night school at Yeshiva University. I mean, this guy paid his dues and did a lot of work in order to reach out and bridge that gap with the other cops. And we talk a lot about, how we want to change the police. Harvey was able to make such change through a top-down authoritarian stance where the commissioner said, it's this way or the highway.
Right.
Anyone fires their gun at this scene, you're in trouble. You're going to be brought up on charges. And people talk about that today, is we need that kind of buy-in from the upper levels of the police department, where we can make all the recommendations we want. But if you kill somebody, if you use your gun when you shouldn't, you're in deep doo-doo. That's what we need, and we see it in the film. And that's how Harvey was able to make such change. He was allied with the people at the top that wanted him to be doing it, and there was a receptive audience coming again out of these horrible incidents like Attica, Munich, and Dog Day Afternoon, which we talk about in the film.
Yeah. We got to wrap up in a couple minutes, and for me, this is the kind of conversation that could go. One of the things I love about doing what I do, Stefan, is meeting people like you, storytellers like you, who are uncovering things for all of us. And honestly, I could sit for a couple of hours with an open bottle of wine and just go, okay, can somebody hit record? We'll take the Terrence Malick approach and just keep recording.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Ben Ward, I mean, to me at the time, I mean, he was pretty high level. He goes on to become a commissioner. Doesn't he at one point appear in front of the store with no arms, with his arms up? Isn't he also one of those, I guess you wouldn't call him a top-down figure, but getting closer to the top, that clearly had an influence? And again, I'm so glad you included him in the film, because I'm going to do some more digging to find out more about this guy.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought him up. Again, it's our responsibility as filmmakers, to go back and really study what happened, talk to people who really were there, who lived it. This is a tradition in history that goes back from Studs Terkel and Zora Neale Hurston back to Herodotus. You talk to the people on the ground, find out the real story. You can't just read the New York Times. Much as it saddens me to say that. So we learned about Ben Ward, and it was super hard getting him into this movie. But, I realized here's a guy who had this huge impact and who history had kind of been neglecting. And he did things that were so inventive, thinking way out of the box for his time. He actually invited this radical lawyer, this Black Panther lawyer, Gerald Lefcourt,
which is
down
so
to
great.
the scene. Yeah, I mean, I didn't understand what Ben Ward had done until I talked to some of these cops who still hate the guy.
Right.
He's still persona non grata among any cop of that era, because he was a cop for he was a lawyer for the Panther 21. They hated this guy, yet Ben Ward risked his own reputation to bring Gerald Lefcourt in there in the hopes that he could get them to pick up a walkie and start the process of communication in a really dramatic moment,
I love that your film includes walkie-talkies. It's just, there's no cell phones in this movie. This is, can you imagine what negotiation would have been like back in the 70s if we had cell phones? Stefan, I hate to say it, but we gotta wrap up. I'm thrilled for you. I hope the film is received well. I'm sure it will be. Congratulations again. Holding your fire is what negotiation is all about. I mean, it really is. And thank you for the story and for your time today. I'm actually going to be in town for a couple days, so who knows? Maybe we'll cross paths. But yeah, thanks again for this film. And hey, really quick, what's next for you other than, of course, Hold Your Fire?
We have a couple of super exciting projects, which I'm not
Nice.
allowed to talk about under pain of
Right. Right.
but you'll be the first to know.
That's great. Hey, listen, wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining me on Face to Face. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So there you have it, Stephan Forbes here on Face to Face talking about his new film, Hold Your Fire, and a whole lot of other things. This is a movie you're going to want to check out. It's a story you're going to want to step into. I've learned a ton, not only because I saw the film, but did some research and also had this wonderful conversation with Stephan as well. World premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival, coming soon, it seems to me, to a digital theater of one kind or another near you. So check it out. This is a film about a lot of things. It's about reconciliation. It's about listening, and it's about finding a space for others and creating, I was going to say a space for embrace. Wow, that's kind of corny, but I think you know what I mean. Bringing others into that circle, and the reality is they're already there. We just gotta sometimes pay a little more attention. Don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my podcasting. Face2facelive.ca will get you there as well. You can read about my speaking and my writing, get a copy of Real Change is Incremental there as well, and see the whole library we have there on Face to Face as well, which is coming up on 600 interviews. There's lots there to choose from and listen to, and about 10 more in the library, digital library, waiting to go live, and about 8 or 10 I'm going to be doing at the Toronto Festival this year, Toronto Film Festival this year, which I'm super excited about. Don't forget to like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and we would love it if you'd leave us a review on iTunes as well. Not coming right up, you've just listened to it, but that was Stephan Forbes and his compelling new film, Hold Your Fire. Thanks for listening to Face one more time.